Hello, MCU fans! Today we're going to take a look at the question of whether or not Doctor Doom was created after this fateful meeting from Endgame. So there's lots of cool theories out there on why Tony Stark and Doctor Doom look the same, but I think you'll find this one has a unique twist to it. Because I was working on the update to my History of the Multiverse video, version 2.0, and I ran across some really interesting information. So there will be spoilers for Endgame, although that's been out for quite some time, so you're probably fine with that. So let's dive right in and see what we can find out. Don't forget, we have an October contest running all month long. Be a subscriber, leave a comment, you could win a book or a steelbook. Best of luck. And we have a membership option with lots of cool perks, so you might check it out. Plus, hang around to the end of the video, and we'll talk about the Doomsday Countdown rewatch on the Discord. All right, so this theory starts with Steve's mission to return the stones after the time heist in Endgame, right? He says, I'm going to go and clip all the branches. And Smart Hulk says, you have to return the stones to the exact moment you got them. So he's ready to go, right? He gets on the time platform and heads back to return the stones. Now, if you're like me, you really want to know how exactly did he do that? I mean, it probably wasn't too hard to return the time stone to the Ancient One. She was just standing there waiting for it to come back again, right? But the Mind Stone, that could be a little tricky. Remember, he had to get the scepter away from the Hydra goons. He says, I'm going to be running point on the scepter, and he ends up saying, Hail Hydra to Sitwell. And sure enough, eventually they do give him the briefcase with the scepter in it, and I love that he's smirking as he walks out of the elevator with a bunch of confused Hydra agents. But unfortunately, things got more complicated when he runs into his earlier self, and after a big fight, he has to turn to him and say, Bucky is alive, which surprises his earlier self, and he's able to get the drop on him and use the scepter to take him out. So this raises a couple questions. First of all, does he need to put the Mind Stone back into Loki's scepter? I mean, he doesn't have the scepter with him. He just has the stone. And then the question is, does he have to return it to the Hydra goons? Does he have to take it back to the exact moment when it was taken away from someone? Or is what Hulk was meaning is you have to take it back to the point where you removed it from the branch? I mean, technically speaking, when Cap hands Ant-Man the scepter and says, Scott, get this back to the compound, that's when Scott left the branch with the stone. So is this the point when he's supposed to return it? I guess you can see the confusion, right? This is really tricky for Cap to go and return all of these. All right, so the ether would not be fun at all to return, right? I mean, remember, Rocket's saying, you're going to charm Jane, and I'm going to poke her with this thing. Well, of course, Thor goes off to talk to Frigga, and it's up to Rocket to wait until Jane gets out of bed, and then as she walks away, he sneaks up behind her and jabs her with it. Well, first of all, it's no longer this gaseous form being held inside that little device. It's now a stone. So does Steve have to jab the stone back in Jane somehow? Or maybe, again, is it just that he needs to return the stone in some form or fashion back to the branch around the time when it was taken? All right, the Power Stone could be really tricky too, because if he has to return it to this exact moment, remember, Nebula burned her hand off as she reached in to grab the containment unit, that was holding the stone. And then, of course, we run into the problem that Rhodey is able to return from the time heist, but Nebula, right at the moment when she's ready to leave, the other Nebula, the one from 2014, links up with her brain, basically, her mind, and paralyzes her and connects the two of them together. And now she's left, laying on the ground, realizing Thanos knows. So, okay, is Cap going to run into the Nebula being captured by Thanos? How does he return this stone? Craziness, right? And then what exactly is the protocol on returning the Soul Stone? I mean, you have the Red Skull saying to Clint and Natasha, if only it were that easy. But I wonder if it's almost like he's saying it also to Steve. Like, Steve, good luck, buddy. I mean, does he toss the stone down there with Natasha's body? Or does he have to return it to that weird, river thing that Clint woke up in when he found the Soul Stone? So, I don't know. And maybe Steve doesn't even know. But the one that I really want to talk about is the Space Stone. Okay, so obviously we had the weird situation where Loki, bolts off with the Tesseract a la the Space Stone, and then the TVA has to come and basically prune him, which means that version of the Space Stone ended up inside Casey's collection there with all of the other Infinity Stones. So obviously, Cap is not going to get that version of the stone, which is why they have to do a risky Hail Mary and jump to another point in time. And notice Tony's saying that basically we can find more Pym particles and the Space Stone, but he says, I have a vaguely exact idea. Not real precise, right? But ultimately, he says, we need to go to 0407 1970. So April 7th of 1970. Now, we know from a prop, which isn't always reliable, but still, it gives us a date of birth of 5/29 of 1970 for Tony. So that means he went, about 2 months before he was born in the 70s. Okay, so why is it so difficult to return this? Well, first of all, remember, the Space Stone was inside a vault, and Tony had to use his gauntlet there to basically burn the vault open, and then finally now he was able to get to it. Back in the game, he says. But what he got to was the Tesseract, not the Space Stone. So does the Space Stone need to somehow be put back in a Tesseract? But either way, Tony reaches in with his gauntlet, grabs the Tesseract, and places it in a briefcase. But then things get even trickier, because look who shows up. It's Howard Stark, and he's calling out for Arnim Zola. That's awesome. But anyway, he says, hey, the door's this way, pal. So, okay, you see why this is so tricky, because if Steve does have to return it to this exact moment, that ain't going to be easy because Howard Stark's hanging around. But the more I think about it, the more I'm thinking they have to return it to the point when it was removed from the branch. So when they actually left, basically, back through the quantum realm. But anyway, so we get this very interesting conversation with Howard. He says, my wife is expecting, and notice Tony's face. He's really confused by that. In fact, here again, he's looking really confused, trying to do the math in his head. Like, what? I'm not born yet? And in fact, he asks Howard, how far along is she? And he's like, oh, I don't know, and kind of does a motion with his hands there. But we know she's about 7 months along, maybe 7.5 months. Well, anyway, I think everything kind of calms down when Tony realizes, okay, that's right. I came back before I was born. So this whole situation where Tony was a little confused when he learned the timing of his mother's pregnancy has led to some people wondering if maybe a storyline in the comics with Arno Stark, his mysterious brother that he didn't know he had, if maybe that's coming into play. I'm not really going that direction with this theory because I think Tony was just initially surprised that he had actually gone back in time before he was even born, and so was just thrown off because, this whole situation with the Time Heist was pretty crazy. But anyway, if you're into this theory with the mysterious brother, let me know in the comments, but that's not the direction I'm going. So anyway, back to the story. After Steve returns all the stones and he believes at least clips all the branches, we're going to get to that in just a second, Steve then goes and creates a new branch and lives with Peggy Carter. Now, I know that the writers and the directors disagree with each other on this, but I think it has to be a branch, right? In fact, I think everything during the Time Heist is a branch. I mean, remember, they knock out Star-Lord, and so there's really no way he would have got to the Power Stone in time before Korath showed up. And even more important, Steve told 2012 Steve that Bucky was alive. He told Sitwell, Hail Hydra. And of course, you have Loki taking off with the Tesseract. None of these things could have happened in the Sacred Timeline. So I think all of them are in a branch. And then finally, after living in that branch with Peggy, old man Steve Rogers returns to the Sacred Timeline with a shield, a very mysterious shield that we still don't know where he got it. But anyway, he gives that then to Sam so he can become the new Captain America. But the key is he believes that he successfully clipped all those branches. Okay, so we know the TVA cleaned up that extra Loki branch. I like to call it a branch off a branch, right? Because they came in and pruned him, and in fact, Ravonna explained what the Avengers did, that was supposed to happen, but you escaping was not. Of course, the irony is, actually, it was supposed to happen. She just didn't know that because He Who Remains wanted that Loki to escape, to be pruned, to be brought to the TVA, and then eventually to come before He Who Remains himself so he could offer Loki the chance to take over the TVA. As he said, I paved the road. So, okay, the key is the TVA took care of the Loki branch, right? But my question is, was Steve Rogers actually successful in clipping all those other branches? I bring that up because the Russos in an interview were asked about bringing back Robert Downey Jr., and they said, we can't explain that as it's part of the story, but there's nobody else in the world who could play this character the way he's about to. So that's made people think, oh, there's got to be some tie then with Robert Downey Jr.'s character, with Tony Stark. And in fact, there's been a lot of great theories out there that maybe Tony Stark's parents died and he was adopted by someone in Latveria. And so instead of becoming Iron Man, he became Dr. Doom. But the question I want to try to solve is, okay, if this is what happened, where did it happen? What branch did this happen in? What universe did this happen in? Okay, so now I want to show you the statement that I just ran across recently and that I had totally forgotten about. So I mentioned before that Smart Hulk said you have to return the stones to the exact moment you got them. But then he says, or you're going to open up a bunch of nasty alternate realities. Whoa, So they're literally calling it out in Endgame that if Steve fails to do this right, he not only won't clip the branches, but will get some nasty alternate reality. Well, what if Steve didn't even realize that he was unsuccessful in clipping the 1970 branch and instead turned it into one of those nasty alternate realities? So basically, all those ideas where Tony Stark becomes Doctor Doom instead of becoming Iron Man were created because Steve failed to clip that branch. It's like a branch off of 616 where, we're going to end up with Doctor Doom. That would be crazy, right? Now, consider that He Who Remains kept certain elements out of 616. I mean, there was no Fantastic Four, there was no X-Men. That seemed to be intentional. And in fact, we saw in What If Season 3 what we might have gotten had He Who Remains not manufactured the sacred timeline. This foosball table had on it everything. I mean, there's a bunch of 616 characters, sure, but it also had X-Men, heroes and villains. And we even saw in one of the branches in What If Season 3 that suddenly a storm shows up, that mutants are popping up, that probably it was He Who Remains keeping them out of the timeline. Well, additionally on this foosball table, we see Fantastic Four, heroes and villains, in particular Doctor Doom. So originally there was no Doctor Doom, but now because Steve failed to, clip that 1970 branch, we do have a Doctor Doom. Oh my goodness. Now, for me, the only bummer with this theory is that means he didn't come from 828. I mean, I really like the idea of him coming from the same universe as Reed Richards, but I also think it's pretty wild to think that Steve Rogers accidentally created Doctor Doom in his failure to return that space stone. Okay, so let me know. What do you think about this theory? I mean, wouldn't it be crazy if Doomsday and Secret Wars all are going to happen simply because Steve Rogers failed in his final assignment? That would be crazy. Anyway, let me know your thoughts. I love to read and respond to everything. And don't forget about that October contest. Be a subscriber, leave a comment, win a book or a steelbook. And there's the membership option in case you're interested in that. Plus, I always love to mention the Discord. Here we are in the Marvel Theories section where we come up with some of the craziest ideas you could possibly imagine. And I promised I would talk about the Doomsday Countdown rewatch every day listed here at 7 p.m. Eastern. We watch a different movie or show as we head towards the December 18, 2026 release of Doomsday. So we have 2,400 members across the globe, conversations 24/7, and I'll leave a pinned comment so you can join. Also, if you don't mind, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we'll all continue to enjoy the ever-growing, the ever-changing Marvel Cinematic Universe.